Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. The Alberta government has announced it'll be offering COVID-19 vaccine shots at various meatpacking plants across the province. We hear from the Alberta pastor who spent time in prison for breaking our province's public health orders. And as our national debt is now over $1 trillion, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation's new federal director speaks out about Ottawa's massive spending.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Alberta Health Minister Tyler Shandro announced a plan to vaccinate 15,000 workers at meatpacking plants across the province. Shandro tweeted earlier today that the COVID-19 vaccine shots will be done on site at many of the 136 plants or in community locations beginning this week. Shandro says now that supplies of the Moderna vaccine are ramping up, plans are back on for a vaccination clinic at Cargill's Beef Slaughterhouse near High River, which was the site of a major outbreak last year. With more Albertans being vaccinated, more families will be able to see their loved ones at continuing care facilities. The province announced that beginning May 10th, updated public health measures will come into effect. Health Minister Tyler Shandro says the change will include increasing the number of designated family and support persons for each resident.
With the change that we are announcing today, each resident will be able to have up to 4 people as designated family or support persons, and previously it was 2. Also, where possible, and provided that the majority of residents agree, indoor social visits with up to 4 visitors will be able to resume again, as long as they're all from the same household and they follow distancing, masking, and other health measures.
Environment ministers in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario say they were not consulted about Ottawa's new goal for cutting greenhouse gas emissions by up to 45% of 2005 levels by the year 2030. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made the pledge last week at the virtual Global Climate Summit. Federal Environment Minister Jonathan Wilkinson did, however, ask for input from federal opposition party leaders. An aide to Ontario's Environment Minister points out that federal ambition relies heavily on the provinces. Conservative leader Erin O'Toole says the Trudeau Liberals may need to ban all international flights right now. He says his party believes the government should at least suspend incoming flights from all hotspot countries and not just those from India and Pakistan. O'Toole says the move is necessary to secure the border as COVID-19 cases surge in some parts of the country. On May 3rd, Pastor James Coates from Grace Life Church in Spruce Grove, Alberta, is going to court for violating our province's public health restrictions. Bridge City News had an exclusive 15-minute interview with Pastor Coates discussing the time he spent in jail and a discussion about his upcoming trial. Pastor Coates says what he cannot wrap his head around right now is how the province can implement these strict public health measures when the science doesn't add up.
I'm going to be tried for violating the Public Health Act without there being any real testing of the legitimacy of that law. And the reason that they've done that is that the Crown or the Attorney General, the government, is not able to produce the evidence that would support the lockdown measures that are in place. You would think that after 13 months of being in these lockdown measures that have been supported apparently by science, that they'd be able to produce that science in order to be able to go into that contest over the legitimacy of these laws, and they can't. And so that should be alarming to not just all Albertans, but all Canadians.
Catch the full, informative interview with Pastor Coates discussing the trials he, his family, and his church have been going through coming up in the second half of our program. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation announced that they have a new federal director. FRANCO, one of our regulars here in Bridge City News, is taking over from Aaron Woodrick. Woodrick is off to the think tank, the Macdonald-Laurier Institute in Ottawa. FRANCO will be leaving Calgary and heading to Ottawa, holding our federal politicians to account and sticking up for Canadian taxpayers. FRANCO, first of all, congrats on being appointed federal director and your upcoming move to Ottawa. How much of an impact are you hoping to have as you move to our nation's capital?
Thank you so much. And yeah, I really intend to hit the ground running. And one of the big things that I'm going to be focusing on and more work that needs to be done is pushing the feds to actually take the debt tab seriously. I mean, the federal government has already racked up more than $1 trillion worth of debt. If you break that down per person, that's a cost of about $30,000 per Canadian, right? So we're going to be pushing our politicians in Ottawa to be finding savings, to tighten their belts like everyone else, so that taxpayers aren't going to be walloped.
What are your thoughts about the Trudeau Liberals creating more taxes to dip into the pockets of Canadians to pay off some of that huge debt?
No way, no way. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, he promised that he wasn't going to raise taxes. He promised that he wasn't going to raise costs. And I can tell you right now, I mean, Canadians cannot afford higher taxes. Many Canadian families and businesses are struggling. And a message that I'm going to be bringing loud and clear to the politicians in Ottawa is that they need to find savings because Canadians cannot afford higher taxes.
That was the new federal director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, FRANCO TERRAZZANO, joining me from Calgary. The Lethbridge Police has suspended an officer in connection with a possible improper search of a database. Police say the incident occurred on February 5th of this year. As a result of the possible improper search, LPS has suspended the officer with pay and handed the matter over to the Alberta Serious Incident Response Team to investigate. This is not the first time the LPS has had to deal with issues regarding searches of their database. Over the course of 11 months in 2018, Lethbridge West MLA Shannon Phillips was searched 8 times by 5 different police officers, one of whom is now retired, along with 1 civilian employee. An online petition is aiming to end Lethbridge Police Service's Wanted Wednesdays Facebook posts. The posts, which will share the names, pictures, and information about the alleged offenses and previous convictions of suspects, are aimed to make the public aware that the suspect is at large. It also helps police obtain information from the community on their whereabouts. The petition criticizes the posts and says, the practice bypasses the presumption of innocence and defines people entirely in terms of their alleged offenses. It also promotes ill-informed racist and sexist comments on a public forum and does nothing at all to promote useful dialogue. Lethbridge Police responded in a statement earlier today where they said, while there are no immediate plans to discontinue publicly sharing information surrounding those individuals wanted on warrants of arrest, LPS will be reviewing its use of this tool along with its short and long-term communication strategies as part of its action plan to better serve the community. So far this year, the Lethbridge Police Service Facebook page has published 9 Wanted Wednesday posts. 3 of the suspects were female, 7 under the age of 30, and 4 appear to be visible minorities. The petition has already garnered 300 signatures as of Monday afternoon. The original poster of the petition could not be reached for comment. A staple of the Coaldale community closed its doors for good on April 25th. Delo's Pizza had been serving residents of Lethbridge and Coaldale for over 4 decades. As Micah Quinn explains now, a drive-by farewell was held at the restaurant to celebrate and thank the restaurant owners for providing good food and company.
A total of 300 vehicles cruised through Coaldale and made their way to Delo's Pizza, where owners Nick and Sia Koyas and their daughter Christina looked on. The family are hanging up their aprons after 41 years in the community.
The community was great. The people in this town are so wonderful. They're like family to us, all our customers and all our people who supported us. It was overwhelming for my parents. They didn't know what was going on. My mom doesn't really cry. She's a strong woman, but yesterday it was so emotional for her, and she's gonna miss everybody, but she'll be still active in the community and make sure she sees all her customers again.
Delo's Pizza has a long and storied history in Coaldale, dating all the way back to Boxing Day of 1979.
They continued on, and then my Uncle George decided to open up a place in Lethbridge. In the industrial section, and then so me, my dad, and my sister just took over the whole place, and then we've been running ever since. We even actually got calls today on our moving day to see if we would make a pizza. But yeah, people have met at Delo's, they've had dates at Delo's, people got engaged in Delo's, everyone grew up in Delo's, their families, grandkids, yeah, and it's just great. We had overwhelming support in this town.
What's next for the family, you might ask?
So we'll see what the future holds. Maybe we'll open up a Delo's someplace else.
For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
There are many people who are trying to make Lethbridge a better and a safer place. You can include Dr. Sophie Kearneys in that group. She's a microbiology researcher at Lethbridge College. She studies the side effects of antibiotics and explains why we're seeing an increase in antibiotic-resistant bacteria.
We have used antibiotics since 1940, So a long time. We have selected antibiotic-resistant bacteria, and we have more and more. If we use more antibiotics, you will select more antibiotic-resistant bacteria. And this bacteria, I need to add two more things. One, they divide very quickly. So for E. coli, it will be 20 minutes. So imagine that. And the other thing is that they have a very big, high plasticity, genetic plasticity. So they can exchange genes basically between each other.
Learn more about the research work that Dr. Sophie is doing at Lethbridge College when it comes to bacteria and antibiotics. That Q&A with Jeanette Rocher is coming up later in our broadcast. Fitness centres were forced to shut down once again in our city after the government of Alberta reverted back to step one of the COVID-19 restrictions on April 6th. The Lethbridge Chamber of Commerce hosted a virtual sit-down Monday with owners of gyms in our community. Now, the Chamber encouraged owners to voice their concerns about what needs to be done to help the fitness industry survive during this difficult time.
You know, as the voice of business, the Chamber really genuinely wants to be there to support. You know, we found that when we got groups together that shared the same similar pain and challenges, it was good to kind of bounce ideas off of each other. But then you never know what we can maybe bring and become your advocate.
For us having been closed for so long, and we own the buildings. So, you know, whether our doors are open or whether our doors are closed, we're paying mortgage, we're paying property tax, we're paying utilities to keep the heat and the water to the building. We're paying insurance for the building, the liability insurance, because you can't get rid of that. And the list goes on, snow removal. So unfortunately, these expenses will still incur whether we're completely open, partially open, or completely closed. And I think by far that's been our biggest barrier to stop us from moving forward.
The Chamber is hoping these events will help get businesses back to work and create healthy dialogue within our community. With only a handful of games left in the WHL regular season, the Lethbridge Hurricanes are looking to finish the season off strong. On Saturday, the Canes were beaten by the Calgary Hitmen 7-2, but rebounded Sunday against the Hitmen 4-1. Logan McCutcheon opened the scoring for the Hurricanes, his first Western Hockey League goal.
Yeah, it feels amazing. It's kind of like a lifelong dream to score your first WHL goal. And now that I finally got it, it's just an incredible feeling. It's something I'll never forget. There's excitement. It's something that I've always wanted to do, is get that first one. And now that it finally happened, it was just incredible, exciting. Some relief too, just getting the first one out of the way. It was just incredible.
Well, he was real good. He's been so good all year long, getting better and better. He's so smart offensively, and he's getting better defensively. He works hard with his feet, and his hockey sense is elite. And I think it was just only a matter of time till he scored. And obviously, last night he scored the one goal, and he had a chance to score another one, hit the post as well.
The World Curling Federation has identified 2 positive COVID-19 cases ahead of Friday's start of the World Women's Curling Championship in Calgary. The first came from tests done last Friday during the pre-competition quarantine period, and the second after enhanced tests over the weekend. The Federation is not identifying the team that produced the 2 positive tests. It says all other tests since the teams arrived in Calgary have so far been negative. U.S. health officials lifted a pause on the COVID-19 vaccine. They used Johnson & Johnson's single-dose shot after scientific advisors decided its benefits outweigh the risk of a blood clot.
CDC, in partnership with FDA, is recommending that administration of the Johnson & Johnson or Janssen vaccine resume. To be clear, we are no longer recommending a pause to the Johnson & Johnson vaccine.
We're confident that the Janssen COVID-19 vaccine meets our robust standards for safety, effectiveness, and quality for a medical product that is used widely, including in healthy individuals.
10 years has not filled the huge void created by a massive tornado outbreak that killed more than 320 people in 6 U.S. states a decade ago. Many of the survivors look back on that fateful day, and now they've been trying to heal.
Michaela! Michaela! I mean, it just laid everything down. But it's you know, it's come back. It's recovered. The house, you know, feel like it's coming apart, and then when it felt like it was over, before it was over, And then we went outside and there was trees all around, you know, our yard. Our roof was gone off our house. It was, but we were fortunate. We were fortunate.
And then you had to come dig graves for your neighbors.
Yes, did. You help people. There's people here in this community that really were good to help. They really were.
So this is where my house was. There was a fence line, and there was a big tree over the driveway. I mean, just walking out and just seeing just the destruction. How some houses were only cement slabs, and some houses there was no damage, and some houses were missing roofs, and some just windows. It was like God, like there was a pick or choose for this tornado of what to hit and what to leave alone.
Thousands of protesters marched through the streets of central London, England over the weekend. Many were calling for the immediate ease of the coronavirus lockdown. There has already been the easing of some restrictions in the United Kingdom, including the reopening of hair salons, various retail outlets, along with outdoor restaurants and pubs. Indoor venues such as theaters, cinemas, and indoor seating at restaurants are scheduled to reopen on May the 17th. It was great to get back to the double-digit temperatures once again here in southwestern Alberta, and that warming trend will continue throughout the week. A complete look at the weather picture is coming up. It felt a lot more like spring today, a great day to go out for a hike if you're fortunate enough to have the day off. Jeanette Rochelle is back with a full look at the long-range weather forecast. Jeanette, the mercury will be climbing even more as the week progresses.
Yes, that is so true, Hal. As we get closer to the end of the week, we're going to be seeing temperatures soar up into the 20s. But until then, into this evening, we can see a chance of showers and clearing overnight, 50 kilometer per hour winds into tomorrow as well. On Tuesdays, those 50K winds persisting. But sunshine tomorrow, high of 18 degrees into Wednesday, 19. And then as we get into Thursday and Friday, that's where we see those 23-degree days with a mix of sun and cloud. And as we get into the weekend, unfortunately, we're going to see a 60% chance of rain all throughout the weekend, starting Saturday, all through Saturday night and into Sunday. So what can I say? April showers, right? They bring May flowers, hopefully, but we're going to be loving those 20-degree temperatures later on this week, keeping us well above the average high for this time of year, which is 15 degrees, average low 1 degree. 27 was our high temperature back in 1992, and in 1967 we had our chilliest day on record, which was -13. Sun rose this morning at 6:17 a.m. and our sunset this evening 8:41 p.m. We're getting closer to that 9 o'clock hour for the sunset. That's very exciting. As we look to tomorrow, 15 degrees, both in Victoria and Vancouver, with mainly overcast skies into Edmonton there. 8 degrees, the high with a mix of sun and cloud, and a high of a lovely 17 degrees tomorrow with lots of sunshine in Calgary. As we look further into the rest of the prairies, we're going to be seeing mainly sunny skies. Saskatoon, 11 degrees, Regina, 16 degrees, and Winnipeg, high of 18 degrees. Should be a beautiful day there. Really, Saskatoon, the only one that's battling that wind chill factor early in the morning. Could feel more like -7 in the morning as they climb up to 11 degrees for the rest of the day there. 30% chance of showers in both Toronto and Ottawa tomorrow with a high of 12 in Toronto, 14 degrees the high in Ottawa, and 14 also in Montreal with a mix of sun and cloud, the only one not seeing showers tomorrow. Over on the east coast, there are chance of showers pretty much in every city there. 11 degrees, the high for Fredericton, 9 for Halifax, 40 kilometer per hour winds for both of those cities. Charlottetown seeing showers, also fog dissipating later on in the day, 7 degrees the high, and 8 degrees for St. John's, Newfoundland. And get this, they could see 10 to 20 millimeters of rain and 60 to 80 kilometer per hour winds. There you have it. That is your forecast.
Today's weather is brought to you by Jeff Reimer of Royal LePage South Country Real Estates, 403-380-1779.
Alberta's health minister announced plans to vaccinate meat plant workers across the province against COVID-19. Tyler Chandro says the shots will be offered to 15,000 workers at 136 federal and provincial meatpacking plants starting this week. He says inoculations will be done at a combination of on-site and community locations. Plans for a clinic at Cargill Slaughterhouse near High River were put off last week. That plant was the site of a major outbreak last year, with nearly half of its 2,200 workers testing positive for the novel coronavirus. Chandro says the postponement was due to a reduction and a delay in last week's Moderna vaccine shipment. A strike by more than 1,000 dock workers has paralyzed operations at the Port of Montreal. Members of the Canadian Union of Public Employees walked off the job earlier today in what may be a short-lived strike at the key link in Canada's supply chain. Canada's federal labour ministers said that if an agreement is not reached soon, Ottawa will table back-to-work legislation in the coming days. Minister Tassi said the Liberals would prefer not to intervene, but said a work stoppage at the port would cause significant harm to our economy. The European Commission says it has launched legal action against vaccine maker AstraZeneca over supply issues. It says the British company has not come up with a reliable strategy to ensure a timely delivery of doses as agreed to in a contract with the EU. The contract was for an initial 300 million doses for distribution among 27 member countries. But only 30 million were delivered in the first quarter of this year. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 68 points on the day to finish at 19,171. The Dow was down 61 points to 33,982. The S&P 500 was up 7 points to 4188, and the Nasdaq was up 121 points on the day to 14,139. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 17 cents to 61.97 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 6 cents to 2.79 US. Gold was up 2 cents to 17.8140 US an ounce, and silver was even on the day at 26.23 US an ounce. Wheat is at $332 per metric ton, barley's at $343, canola's at $828, and corn is at $390 per metric ton. Live cattle were up 65 cents to $118.50, feeder cattle were down $1.10 to $132.75, and lean hogs were down 10 cents to $109.25. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 80.66 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, Alberta's Health Minister Tyler Chandro announced a plan to vaccinate 15,000 workers at meatpacking plants across the province. Chandro tweeted earlier today that the COVID-19 shots will be done on-site at many of the 136 plants or in community locations beginning this week. The Alberta pastor who's going to court for violating the provincial health restrictions says the church has to do what is right. Hear exactly what Pastor James Coates from Grace Life Church in Edmonton meant by that comment in an exclusive interview in just a moment. May 3rd will be a very big day for one Alberta pastor. That's when Pastor James Coates from Grace Life Church in Spruce Grove, Alberta, goes to trial for breaking our province's public health restrictions. Pastor James also spent over a month in jail fighting for what he believes in and the right to allow he and his congregants to freely gather and worship for full services. Pastor James Coates from Grace Life Church joins me now via Skype. Pastor James, thanks so much for your time here today. Let's first of all talk about your experience in jail. Now, you're not the first believer, and you won't be the last, put behind bars. You spent 35 days locked up. Describe what a typical day looked like for you in prison.
You know, a typical day revolved around your meals and your exercise times. And so you would have 3 meals a day and typically 3 hours of exercise once out of quarantine. And so your day would largely revolve around those exercise times. And then in between that, in your cell, you would be looking for productive ways to utilize your time. And so that's more or less the way a day would look. 7 a.m. or so, you'd be up and usually in bed and asleep by 11.
Was everyone wearing masks in jail?
That's a good question. It is required. So the masks are certainly in the vicinity of the mouth. Without going into too much detail, there's some liberty that is exercised on the inside with regard to where that mask is located. But yes, masks are required in prison.
Did you ever fear for your life while you were in jail?
I don't know that I would say that I necessarily feared for my life. There were a couple of moments that were uncomfortable. One, the anticipation of being transferred from quarantine into general public was a little bit nerve-wracking just because I wasn't entirely sure what I'd be getting into. And depending on who you spoke with, you would get a different sense of things. And so there were some moments of discomfort in anticipating that. And there was a few days on our pod in GP where the temperature was definitely up. There was an altercation that resulted in two gentlemen being removed from our pod, and so there was a heightened level of sensitivity on the pod for a few days there, and so I certainly sensed that in the room. And so I wouldn't say that I was ever threatened for my life in any actual direct way, but there were moments that were certainly uncomfortable.
Did any of the prisoners actually come up to you and say, Pastor, what are you doing here behind bars with us? This is crazy. Why are you in here?
Yeah, I mean, on the way in, actually, my first interaction with two gentlemen that I came into the facility with, like right at the very beginning, they were just sort of telling me why they were in, and I shared with them why I was in, and yeah, right away the feedback was like, "What are you doing here?" Even some of the guards that were there to process me on the way into the facility, they did not agree with my being there, thought it was ridiculous, and so the general sentiment is that that I shouldn't have been there, and it didn't take long for me to figure out they didn't want me there. The remand center did not want me there in prison, and it was just sort of disruptive, I think, to their normal rhythm of things, and so yeah, there was definitely a lot of that sentiment among the inmates.
Maybe a reason why they didn't want you there as well, because you could maybe start up a Bible study and witness to some of the prisoners, maybe some of the guards. Did you have the opportunity?
I definitely did, and I remember my first opportunity really well. I was it was my first evening, I think, on our new pod, and a gentleman from another tier who was on exercise came to our door and had just shared with me that he had turned his back on God when his 5-year-old son had died in a fire.
Oh, wow.
And so he just came to me with a great deal of pain. And I knew that I needed to administer compassion to this man. I mean, he had suffered an immense loss. And so I sought to do that, to just express great compassion for his loss and how sorry I was. And it occurred to me as I was doing that, that God the Father knows what it is to, in a sense, lose his son. And so, given that the Father was willing to crush his son upon the cross for the forgiveness of our sins, I could point out that God the Father knows what it's like to experience that kind of suffering. And so it was a great opportunity for me to minister the gospel to him. I think it really was effective in addressing his need, and moments like that were really dime a dozen as I was given opportunity to do that.
That sounds amazing. But while you were in jail, you must have been missing your family immensely, not just your church family, but your wife, Erin. How often were you allowed to communicate with her?
I was able to communicate with my wife on our exercises, and they were an hour each typically, and that could afford as many as 3 20-minute phone calls. So there were times when I would spend the entire hour speaking with my wife, and so I could do that. I looked forward to that. It was a blessing to be able to connect with her for obvious reasons, and she helped to encourage me and to share with me what was happening on the outside. And a lot of the time on the inside, I was getting negative feedback through Ched Radio, because that's the radio station that comes into our prison cell, one of the four anyway. And so she would give me information that would put wind in my sail and renew my resolve to stay the course. And so that was huge and just a real blessing.
Now, you're going to trial on May 3rd for breaking those public health orders here in Alberta. You're working with the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms on your case here. How's it shaping up so far?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that. They've just separated the actual health violation from the challenge that we're making to the constitutionality of the Public Health Act. So on May 3rd, I'm going to be tried for violating the Public Health Act without there being any real testing of the legitimacy of that law. And the reason that they've done that is that the Crown or the Attorney General, the government, is not able to produce the evidence that would support the lockdown measures that are in place. You can see a JCCF news release that covers this. And so you would think that after 13 months of being in these lockdown measures that have been supported apparently by science, that they'd be able to produce that science in order to be able to to go into that contest over the legitimacy of these laws, and they can't. And so that should be alarming to not just all Albertans, but all Canadians.
Now, in your heart of hearts, how do you really feel about these government restrictions? Now, keep in mind, health officials say they're just trying to keep us safe, preventing the spread of COVID-19.
Well, I think the health measures that are in place are unjust. They're unnecessary. They're an unnecessary infringement on our civil liberties, and I'm deeply concerned. I think Albertans and Canadians need to wake up. Enforcement is increasing. We're over a year into this thing, and you would think at this point in time that with the information that's out, we would be able to lighten things up. And yet, just with every new variant of concern, these measures are increasing to the extent that there are rumors that our prime minister is about to launch an emergency act, the emergency act from war times. And so this is just deeply concerning. We said back in February, I believe it was, that we were concerned that our province and country were being fundamentally altered, and our premier has called that a conspiracy theory. Well, I would like it to be a conspiracy theory. I would like to be proven wrong, but everything that's happened since then has only validated that. And so I think Canadians, Albertans need to be deeply concerned. Our country is being taken away from us. And I just have zero confidence in our federal government and our provincial government to do the right thing and protect our civil liberties.
Now, I understand this wasn't just your decision to open up the doors, hold the full services at Grace Life Church, but the elders, the board was involved. There must have been a lot of prayer involved as well.
Well, there was. I mean, there was prayer, there was searching of the scriptures, there was interaction with congregants who disagreed with our stance, which was actually incredibly helpful in assisting us to address all of the concerns that could be raised. And it was over a period of time. I mean, the so-called pandemic began in March of 2020. And so we had a lot of time to navigate this based on scripture, interaction with our congregation, interaction with doctors and scientific information that helped to equip us to understand what was really happening. And so absolutely, there was a lot that went into our stance and handling of this situation. And we've really seen the Lord bless the way that we've approached it.
So why not just host online services or adhere to the 15-point capacity like many other pastors are having to do with their churches? And have you heard from some other pastors saying, James, just follow the government restrictions like we're doing here?
Well, I think they fail to understand the nature of the gathering. They treat the gathering like it's going to a hockey game or a basketball game where you just show up, watch the game, and leave. That's not the gathering. The gathering requires participation. There's components of the gathering that are taking place before the structured service even begins. There's fellowship taking place following the service. And so to cut the body off from every working member by limiting the number of people they can be with, and by saying that 85% of the body isn't permitted to be present at any one time, that is getting in the way of the means of grace the Spirit of God uses to build up the body of Christ. And so to go to online is altering the gathering in terms of what it is. Online is not the gathering. And to run 6 or 7 or 10 services to make sure everyone has an opportunity to be there just treats the gathering like it's a spectator sport, and that you can just come, sit, be there, and leave. And that's not the gathering. And so I think fundamentally those who would say that just have a poor, low view of the church.
Now, your church, Grace Life, had the locks changed by Alberta Health Services. The fences were put up, forcing you to hold services elsewhere. Are you and your congregation still holding full services?
Well, we definitely continue to meet and to worship our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. We're committed to that. The church is not a building. It's the people of God who come together and worship the Lord. And so we do continue to meet. We're committed to doing that. And so Jesus is Lord and head of the church. And so our allegiance is to him. We submit to him and his headship and lordship over the church. And so, yes, we continue to glorify him in that way.
At a different location, obviously. Now, there was a large rally at the previous building, Grace Life Church, where some people tore down the fences that were put up. But you and your church members had really nothing to do with either the rally or ripping down the fences, correct?
That is correct. We were at our gathering at an undisclosed location at that time, and our people weren't present for that. And you know, we wouldn't support that kind of behavior where the fence would be taken down that way. It's my understanding that there were Christians who were present who raised the fence back up again, which I just think is wonderful and just models Christ likeness. We want to see the fence come down, but not through violence. We want to see it come down through prayer and a change of heart in our government. And so we were not there and would not support any kind of violent protesting. Any kind of protesting needs to be peaceful and gracious. And so we would support that and recognize its place in our democracy.
How do you feel about the support you've received so far?
I think it's been great. You know, obviously, right now at this point in time, this far into our facility being imprisoned, as it were, the concern might be that we forget, that people forget, that Albertans forget, that Canadians forget what has taken place. And so, I think the challenge is to keep this at the forefront of the minds of the people, because we really need to see this as symbolic of something that is deeply concerning about the trajectory of our province and country. And so when I was imprisoned, I think that my imprisonment was there and in the limelight and got that attention. So the concern, I guess, now is going to be ensuring that people don't forget that there's a church facility that's been imprisoned.
What do you want to say to those people, maybe our viewers who are watching right now, who may not necessarily agree what you're doing and what Grace Life is doing?
Well, I think they need to realize, number one, that we are acting in accord with our conscience. And that should be something that all believers, in fact, all people should uphold. That there should be a desire to uphold the reality that we would be able to act in accord with our conscience. And from there, I would also highlight that I think there's folks that believe this is just a health issue, that what's happening right now revolves entirely around a virus, and that the government is our best friend that's out to help us and assist us through this season. And that just doesn't seem to be the case, because the science doesn't support the measures that are in place. And again, in light of the fact that enforcement's increasing at this stage in the game, it is deeply concerning that we may never come out of this. And if we ever do come out of it, our country will be so different that we won't be able to sing our national anthem anymore. And I'm already at that point. This is not the true North Strong and Free. And so I think people need to realize that even though this doesn't necessarily impact them, or they don't agree with what's happening, there comes a point when this will turn on them, and they too will have their civil liberties being infringed upon. And they need to be aware that what's happening with us has implications long term for them.
Pastor James Coates from Grace Life Church in Spruce Grove, Alberta, thanks so much for your time today.
My pleasure.
If you've ever been seriously ill, you're likely thankful for antibiotics. However, they can have side effects, and we're seeing more and more antibiotic-resistant bacteria, which has researchers busy trying to find some solutions. Joining me is Dr. Sophie Kernies, a microbiology researcher at Lethbridge College. Prior to moving to Lethbridge, she was a tenured research scientist at the Pasteur Institute in Paris, where she developed a unique experimental model of a cell in the intestinal tract. Her published work is used all around the world, and we're so happy to have her with us today. Dr. Kernies, thank you so much for joining me. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Absolutely. So first of all, can you explain what antibiotics are and how they're typically produced?
Okay, so antibiotics are molecules, drugs, like penicillin, for example, that are used to treat some bacterial infection. So it's something that is very important because if you have an infection due to a virus, for example, you will not take an antibiotic. These molecules are produced by bacteria and fungi. And so probably you have heard about penicillin produced by fungi or tetracycline. So this is what we have today on the market.
So can you tell us why we're seeing an increase in antibiotic-resistant bacteria? Why is this such a problem?
It's a big problem. And so I know that today we have a pandemic due to these coronaviruses, but the World Health Organization is basically pushing and to do something to avoid having another big issue with this antibiotic resistant crisis. And so the antibiotic resistant bacteria, first, they were always present on Earth. Even Alexander Fleming, who discovered the first antibiotic, the penicillin, was able to see them and to see this problem, but it was very, very mild. This antibiotic-resistant bacteria are bacteria that are not killed anymore by the antibiotics, and it's because they have mutations. But the thing that we have today is that because we have used antibiotics since 1940, so a long time, we have selected antibiotic-resistant bacteria, and we have more and more. If we use more antibiotics, you will select more antibiotic-resistant bacteria. And this bacteria, I need to add two more things. One, they divide very quickly. So for E. coli, it will be 20 minutes. So imagine that. And the other thing is that they have a very big, high plasticity, genetic plasticity. So they can exchange genes basically between each other. So if you have one bacteria that is resistant, it can go to another kind and another kind. So it's why we have now today with this big crisis due to this antibiotic resistant bacteria.
That is fascinating stuff for sure.
Yeah.
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 Now, for the last number of years, you've been leading a project at Lethbridge College called the Antibiotics Alberta Plant Project, which is focused on studying plants native to Alberta to see if they can be used to produce new antibiotics, right? So what specific types of plants are you looking at or looking for?
Well, I would say, all the plants that we have here could be interesting. And the reason for that is that, as I said before, the antibiotics that we have on the market are only produced by bacteria and fungi. And everyone knows that plants have been used in a traditional way here by the First Nation people, but all over the planet, they were using the plants to treat, their disease, infection, or other disease. And so we took this approach of saying, okay, now we should take the plants and try to see if we could isolate some molecules, and that could be the next generation of antibiotics, because as we discussed before, antibiotic-resistant bacteria are a very, very big problem. And one of the solutions is to find more antibiotic, new ones, because it's kind of a run, the bacteria we will select more and more of these antibiotic-resistant bacteria, but if we have more and more new antibiotics, we can basically face these issues. So, yeah. So any plants could be a good candidate.
Definitely. So you were mentioning that they were used by Aboriginal people to treat sickness. So do we know for a fact if some of these plants were fairly effective?
So there are some reports and it's First Nation from here or from in Canada or around the world. So yes, absolutely, they were using some plants like clover to treat certain type of infection. So of course, before we had not this test to say, oh, we have an infection that is due to a staphylococcus or something like that. So, but because wound, easy to see, it's for us, it's a bit easier than to say, okay, they have been using these plants to treat wounds. So we can suppose that this was because they were due by a bacterial infection or a fungal infection also. So we will basically, use this information and to guide a bit also our
Yeah.
research.
Okay. So how can you determine whether or not a plant will be effective?
So we have some techniques that are now in the lab. They are well established in the lab. So we have been using this technique since 2016. So when we started the project at the college in Lethbridge, and so in a very simple way, you need to put a bacteria in contact with a plant. And we have a way to find out if the bacteria is growing. It's by measuring the optical density, but it's okay. So we can put the bacteria and the plants together and follow that over a period of 18 hours, for example. And then we can see that certain plants are basically avoiding the bacteria to grow completely. So you will have the same kind of result as the one that we could get with a known antibiotic like kanamycin that we use as a positive control. So the technique is in place, and we have students helping us to do that.
That's incredible. So what kind of progress have you made so far? Have you found any molecules that could be used as antibiotics?
We found some molecules. So this is also in collaboration with chemists. So we have a collaboration with Professor Raymond Anderson in UBC, who is helping us with this part of the project, because in science everyone has their specialty, and so the plants that are the most interesting for us are sent to UBC, and then they do the fractionation, and we were able to isolate some molecules from some interesting plants. So this is one of the contributions that we hope to get. So from all the plants that are tested positive for different bacteria, then we hope to get more and more molecules, with the hope that after we will have an antibiotic.
That's fascinating. Now, I understand that you've found a new phenotype introduced by plants. So what is it, and how can it be used for our health?
So this was observed more recently. So it was with students that are working in the lab. We observed that for certain plants, we see something that we call the clumping. Like an aggregate, like a big chunk of bacteria sticking together kind of around the plants. And so we have a student, Nadia, and who is from the University of Lethbridge. She's doing her own thesis with us, and she is very interested, and she wants to continue doing a master in the lab, so it will be great. And so we are studying this new phenotype, as it would be interesting for different applications, such as trying to remove bacteria in the water. The contamination in the water, for example, in feedlots, but also the water that we have in the river could be eventually more clean with plants that are clumping, the bacteria, maybe over application in cosmetics. So this would be some opening for the future.
Right. Now, we're, of course, in southern Alberta, which is, agriculture is a huge industry here. So can you tell us about some local plants that apparently contain phytobiotics, which can be used to naturally promote growth in certain farm animals?
Yeah, so this is another. So we have different direction in the lab, and one of the direction is the phytobiotics, because basically, to give a very quick definition, they are plant extracts that have some activities, and so we are looking always for antibiotic activities. It's known that some plants like oregano or thyme are used to prevent the infection, and we want to basically bring some new phytobiotics from the plants that are growing in Alberta, but also the plants that are given to the animals. And the reason for that is that The farmers don't have access to antibiotics since 2018 to prevent the infection as they were doing before, which is causing quite of some issues because the antibiotics are helping them to prevent infection and also to promote the growth of the animals. So by finding, and we have many plant extracts that are active against, for example, Staphylococcus aureus, that is one of the bacteria that they want to control. We want to bring that to the farmers that they can continue to produce the food, the food animals, or to produce the proteins that we need for to feed us basically. Yeah? So this can be an interesting project to start.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Dr. Kernies, your research also has the possibility of using plants to make natural preservatives for cosmetics. So which plants would be used for this, and what is it about them that would act as a preservative specifically for cosmetics?
So yeah, so cosmetics. So we are in collaboration with a small cosmetic company in Alberta, and so we are thinking and exchanging this problem that they have. Cosmetics is we put makeup and cream, and so you will basically put your hands on the cream and put that on your face, and your hands are containing a lot of microbes. So basically it will contaminate the product that can have some effect on the life shelf of the product, and also can eventually cause some infections. So they are using preservatives in their products like paraben, but we want to try to find some more natural approach for that. So bringing the plants that we have found in the lab that contain some antibiotic activities to them, and putting that in their product. So we hope that in the very near future, we will be able to bring that and have a line of cosmetics containing some natural product coming from Alberta. So this could serve the cosmetic here, but after that, maybe a bit wider around the world.
Oh yeah, well, I would be all about that, obviously.
Yeah, I think it's what the people want, to go more natural, not having some chemicals that can cause some issues.
Yeah, absolutely. So any idea how long this process would take to find these, natural effective antibiotics? How long would that take?
Well, depending. If it is an antibiotic that, like penicillin, for example, just to give you an idea, for Alexander Fleming, it took him 12 years, which was, the first thing was because, this was the starting point. So he had to convince people. But, and we see with coronaviruses, with the vaccine, it takes time to put a drug on the market because we want to make sure that it's really, really safe. So maybe it will take, normally it's about 10 years. But I think it's still very important that we start today to have some antibiotics in the near future. If it is phytobiotics for animals, I think it can take much less time. We hope to, feed the animals with this product, with these plants. And for the cosmetics also, maybe, I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 years, and we will have some plant extract for the livestock or for the cosmetics.
Yeah, that would be so interesting, especially if we can see it available at our local pharmacy. So even in terms of a plant-based antibiotic, any idea as to how long we can see that available at our local pharmacy?
I don't know, hopefully 10 years maybe, and we have to start, and this is the World Health Organization who is pushing to say, okay, we need to find new antibiotics, because the pharmaceutical industry basically quit a bit this topic because it's not very rewarding in terms of money. You develop an antibiotic, it's quite expensive, and then you will have antibiotic-resistant bacteria coming up quite quickly. But still, we don't want to arrive to this situation where they say that if we don't do anything by 2050, we will have 10 million of people dying of this antibiotic-resistant bacteria, which is huge. Today we have 700,000 worldwide, which is a lot. less than what we had for COVID, but we need to do something today.
Absolutely.
And so,
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing. Thank you so much for your expertise, Dr. Kernies. Dr. Sophie Kernies is a microbiology researcher at Lethbridge College. Thanks for joining us today.
thank you, Janet.
I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.